This program is suitable for general viewing.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Who has better story to tell than one who has lived the experience, been part and parcel of it, has been into that journey. Every day we talk about violence, extremism. Every day we talk about extremism. Every day we talk about radicalization. Every day we talk about some elements that are spoiling the name of Islam, elements that are using the name of Islam generally. There may be struggles, there may be fighting, they may be doing their own ijtihad. But again, at the end of the day, the picture that is being sent is that that is the message of the general Islam, and it's being generalized. The ripple effect is that is the global Islamophobia. The ripple effect of that is that Muslims being treated as second-class citizens. The ripple effect of that is one topic that we've been talking about. Muslims in Kenya not given their fair share of rights, being vetted even for citizenship, being denied rights, being profiled and victimized when entering some buildings or any other spaces sometimes. These are some of the ripple effects that are coming when people tend to misuse the name of Islam. Tonight, we are talking to one person who has seen it all. Born in Nairobi, and of course, left the country when he was at the age of 4. He went to the United Kingdom, and of course, he's here tonight to tell us more about his journey. That is none other than Dr. Usama Hassan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Imam. Ahlan wa sahlan. How are you, Shaykhana?
Alhamdulillah, bikhair.
Your profile is full. A senior analyst and researcher at the Institute, a co-author, an imam for over 20 years. You have seen it all, ya Shaykhana. And tonight, I do not want to tell all of that. I don't want to include all of that in your introduction, because it would give people a notion. So tonight, what we want to hear is your story, how it started. Born in Nairobi, very many years ago, left Nairobi by the age of 4, went straight into the United Kingdom. How was it, your first few years in Nairobi? Where did you school and how was it? And then what happened, what necessitated the move from Nairobi to the United Kingdom?
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah. So, by the grace of God, thank you for having me on this program. It's a real honor to be here, especially this is the first masjid I remember in my entire life. I'm in my early 50s now, alhamdulillah. And as you mentioned, I've actually served as an imam for 40 years. I led Taraweeh prayers for the first time in London in 1983.
Allah.
So, the same year I completed my Hifdh al-Quran, alhamdulillah. So, it's been exactly 40 years actually. And but the first masjid, so obviously, I love the masajid. And a true believer's heart is attached to the masajid, as we know. But this beautiful masjid is the first one I remember at the age of 4, 1976. Because my parents were here in 1967 to 1976. They lived here for 9 years.
Wow.
They're from India and Pakistan. When they got married, to move to Medina in Saudi Arabia, because my father was studying there. He graduated from Medina University, and he was sent to Nairobi, or to Kenya. So he was here for those 9 years. He was a close friend of Sheikh Fathuddin. And the masjid, I remember Sheikh Fathuddin from my childhood.
Really?
Yeah. And him visiting us in London as well. So I should mention it, that my earliest memory of a masjid is from the women's gallery here at the Nairobi Central Masjid. Ramadan in 1976, 27th night, we've had Khatm al-Quran. And I remember the little boy sitting in my mum's lap looking over the gallery and listening to the Imam reciting. You know, they did extra qira'at. I was wondering why the Qari, he was reciting Surah Al-Rahman, of course, because it's the favorite surah for many Muslims. And I still remember at the age of 4 wondering, why is this Imam reciting فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ over and over again. And of course later you learn when you study the Quran. So alhamdulillah, we grew up here. Also remember Pangani and Pumwani Masjid, very Pakistani style. Myself and my 3 older siblings all went to the Park Road School, which was called the Muslim Girls' School in those days. Boys were allowed up to, primary school. So I'm the whole generation of boys who can say we went to a girls' school.
To a Muslim girls.
To a Muslim
of course,
girls
I went to that school. It was Muslim Academy.
Right. So yes. I was there for 1 year at nursery. And very happy childhood in Nairobi. I can remember my parents took us on safari a couple of times. The one I can remember, again, 1976, down to the Masai Mara, seeing lions hunt in the wild, hunting deer, hunting warthogs, you know, and across to Tanzania and also Uganda. I can remember Kampala, just arriving in Kampala. All I remember is low whitewashed buildings. My parents saying, this is Kampala. So we did some kind of tour. Actually, one of those tours was with Sheikh Fatuddin and his family as well. And then my father he'd really enjoyed his time in Kenya. He still speaks fluent Swahili, so I don't. I never learned, because Park Road was Urdu medium, Urdu and English, with the Pakistani community in Pangani, where we lived. And he was offered the choice of moving to Pakistan or Brazil or America or London, and he chose London to be close to not too far from his parents in Pakistan. He felt America or Brazil was too far. So he went to London. You know, before that, he's 9 years here. Father's name is Sheikh Suhaib Hassan. He had helped to set up many masajid, madaris, orphanages. He told me the Garissa Young Muslims Orphanage. He helped
Young
set
Muslim
up
Association,
with his father, etc. So then, anyway, Qadar Allah ma sha, we moved to Britain in 1976, and then I've spent, you know, the rest of my life there, basically 45 years, except for 1 year in Pakistan. So we grew up in North London, and a small Muslim community, fledgling, trying to find its place in society. You know, very few masajid, very few halal meat shops. The emphasis was building masajid, getting halal.
In London
halal
at the
meat
time?
In London.
Okay.
One other big problem we had, and London is a great place, of course. Anybody who's visited, I know many of our respected viewers and listeners will have visited London. It's a great place. Alhamdulillah, there's a large Kenyan community there in London and around the UK. But in the 70s and 80s, when we were growing up as children, there was still a lot of racism against black people, against brown people, against non-white people. And unfortunately, that left a deep scar on our lives, because although the racists were the minority, although some of it was mainstream on the media, on the TV, etc., there were a lot of racist voices. You would be regularly told at school, primary school, secondary school, especially primary school actually, go back to where you came from. You don't belong here. You're not white. This is England, this is Britain, this is English people. Yes, very much that. And we occasionally experience racist violence as well, actually. So myself, friends, others were attacked violently.
Physically?
Physically. Occasional, a lot of abuse, verbal abuse. You know, I can remember a man, a ticket inspector at the station, verbally abusing my mum because she was covering. She was covered, but she had bought the wrong ticket by mistake. And he could have just said, "Look, you need this ticket or that ticket." He started swearing at her. Today he would lose his job immediately, but back in the day, in the late 70s, it was normalized. It was completely normal. I remember as a little boy, 7 or 8 years old, standing next to her, kind of crying. I was so angry that I couldn't do anything to this man who was humiliating my mum in public.
In front of you.
Because there were lots of people there. They were watching, you know. This is the ticket inspector, old white man, old white English man. We were once attacked outside Regent's Park Mosque in London, the Central Mosque. I remember racist abuse, and then these racist guys were holding a can of beer. They even threw beer over us. They said, over mum and dad, my sister, you know, they tried to. I think it hit my sister, or some of the beer, maybe mum. And as you know, for a Muslim, that's the worst insult, to have alcohol thrown over you. Another time outside Birmingham Central Mosque, myself and my two older brothers, we went to buy fish and chips, a very British thing. But we were dressed in kameez shalwar, and these young white lads pelted us with stones. We had to run back into the masjid, and we couldn't get our fish and chips. And there's many examples of those kinds of stories. So
how did these experiences affect you and your personality and your perspective of the whites, for example?
Yes, unfortunately, this distorted our perspective of kind of British people, who are actually generally very good and welcoming. They've welcomed millions of immigrants.
But again, at that time, of course, it left an impact.
Yes, and at that time, for a long time in my life, I'm now, as I said, early 50s, but it took me until my 30s, really, to fully feel part of British society and to feel included. Because even at university and other places, you would get racist comments, etc. Even at work, I remember in my 20s.
Okay.
So the feeling was that we're not really part of them. But also, it was to do with our culture. We used to go to Pakistan and Saudi Arabia Pakistan via Saudi every year, every 2 years. We were very lucky from that point of view. So we were strongly attached to our Pakistani and Islamic roots, visiting Mecca and Medina every year or two. We were studying the Quran at home, we kept a Muslim lifestyle. So there was this feeling that actually our lifestyle is very different to the rest of society, and then the racism from the other side didn't help, because that's what you call a push factor now, or pull factor into extremism, is that, well, we're not accepted by mainstream British society, and then we have our own culture, if you like, Islamic culture, lifestyle, so we're going to be separate. And this was not just ourselves, I would say a whole generation, 1 or 2 generations, we're talking about tens of thousands of young British Muslims who were caught in this identity crisis, who wanted to be believers, but felt that Britain was now becoming a post-Christian society. It was losing its Christian values. In my primary school, it was still very Christian, and secondary school. But for my children, there is almost no religion. Most of their friends are atheists, whereas most of my friends are Christians. Yeah.
What was the result of all that now, the pushback, the feeling that there is an aspect of lack of belonging, because these are people that your dad is working there, you're all there, you're trying to establish madaris, masajid and all that, but again, the pushback from the residents, from the local community, the British people at that time, was not as good. So how did that make you feel? And then what was the result of that? What came out of that?
So the result of that was that many of us, I'm talking about tens of thousands of us, British Muslims, or Muslims growing up in Britain, in the 80s, 90s especially, turned to highly political forms of Islam to say, this is your identity and we will protect you. I was very interested in politics. Muslim world politics was fascinating in those times anyway. 70s, the Arab-Israeli wars, Afghanistan, the siege of Mecca, the Iran-Iraq war, the Israel-Palestine conflict was continuing, throughout that time. And suddenly a whole bunch of groups, including the Hizb ut-Tahrir, the Ikhwan groups, the Salafi groups of all types, and they had a thread in common, which was your identity as a Muslim. You're not British or Pakistani, you are a Muslim, and only the Muslims can protect each other, because you see all this racist violence and Islamophobia even at that time. We Muslims have to find our power. Allah will protect us if we follow His deen.
No.
So we became part of, I would say, radical Muslim groups, and by radical I would say actually we were a mixture of good and bad. Being radical is good, being extremist is bad.
Okay.
I would argue. In our language as well, in the Quran, لا تغلوا في دينكم, and in the Hadith, إياكم والغلو في الدين. Ghulu is condemned, extremism. But radical, even in the English language, means something good. It's usually something positive. So we became, I would say, part of groups which are both radical and extremist, meaning we had good aspects and not so good aspects.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, you knew, like, for examples purposes, like the Ikhwani, you feel like all you had was yourself. Like basically there was no one else. There was no one else backing you. But again, you as a small minority, Muslim community in that area, you had but yourself. Nobody else would back you apart from yourself.
Exactly.
So you just had to have yourself.
Exactly.
At the end of the day.
And we joined a group. I became one of the leaders of what later became the largest Salafi group in the Western world.
Okay.
My own parents, mum and dad, going back many generations from India and Pakistan, are all from the Ahlul Hadith Salafi tradition, strong links to Saudi, etc.
Okay.
And for various reasons, so we became active and leaders of a major Salafi organization, which actually exported Salafiyah all around Britain, around the Western world, America, Canada, New Zealand, everywhere, Malaysia, Indonesia. We probably influenced Africa as well, in fact, many of the later preachers. And there were a mix of Salafi, Ikhwan, Hizb ut-Tahrir ideas and others. We had a big impact from Britain, actually, from London. But the key part of it for me was I felt safe for the first time. Because we used to have 2 weekly activities. One was the Dars of Quran and Hadith, or Quran and Sunnah on Sunday mornings in the masjid. The other thing we did was weekly martial arts classes. And for the first time in my life, and these were brothers, many of them converts to Islam, West Indian and white English converts to Islam. Many of them were into martial arts. And they taught us martial arts for self-defense purposes. This was to say, you are likely to be attacked as a black or brown person, as a Muslim. On the street, you must learn how to defend yourself.
At what point did...
And for the first time in my life, I actually felt safe. At the age of 13, I wasn't a great fighter, I learned the basic moves. And that gave me just the confidence that maybe I can defend myself, but also I will have brothers around me who will defend me. And that was a major pull factor into these groups. I believe that still exists now.
At what point did Afghanistan came into your life, the whole aspect of Afghanistan and whatever was happening in Afghanistan around that time in the 70s and 80s?
Yes, so our Salafi group in the 80s talked about jihad a lot. Actually, all the groups did. Hizb ut-Tahrir, Ikhwan, Jamaat Islami, all these groups were operating. We all talked about jihad. I mean, that's the 1980s, right? The Muslim world was talking about jihad a lot, especially in Afghanistan, where there was a live jihad against the Soviet Union. Our leader of our group, a remarkable people, Sheikh Manwar Ali, Abu Muntasir is known as, he decided it was not enough to talk about it. He felt we were being hypocritical because all the groups were just talking about jihad. What's the point of living in comfortable London and just talking about
something
jihad?
Something is happening in Afghanistan.
Yeah, he decided we had to be people of action. We had to take part in the jihad. But how do you make contact with the Afghan Mujahideen? It was through Salafi groups in Holland, actually, that we made contact with Mujahideen in Afghanistan, and specifically the Salafi Mujahideen of Eastern Afghanistan, Kunar, where a hadith scholar called Sheikh Jamilur Rahman had founded one of the jihad groups, was fighting against the Soviet Union, and before that the communists, and after the Soviet Union the communists as well. And through these channels, Sheikh Abu Muntasir took dozens of young men on about 3 or 4 trips from Britain to Afghanistan to the training camps, and even to the front line to fight the jihad against either the Soviet Union, or after they left in 1989, the Soviet-backed communist government of Kabul. And I was fortunate enough to be in the right place at the right time. I accompanied him on one trip in 1990 to 91. We went over the Christmas New Year period. So I say I was in Afghanistan with the Mujahideen 1990 to 91. People think I was there for 2 years. I was actually only there for 10 days, but over the Christmas New Year period. At the time I was a second-year undergraduate student at University of Cambridge, alhamdulillah. By the grace of God, I was studying at Cambridge theoretical physics, where our teachers included Stephen Hawking and other people. But I'd served as an imam already for
so you accompanied him in Afghanistan at that time?
We went to Afghanistan. We spent a week at the training camp. We spent 24 hours at the front line exchanging artillery fire with the Soviet-backed communist forces of Kabul. It was an exhilarating experience, I have to say. The camaraderie, the feeling of fearlessness. You don't believe you're going to die, actually. You think somebody else is going to be made shaheed. And if Allah takes you, then you're a shaheed. So that exhilarating feeling, when I think about it now, I was 19 then, it still gets my adrenaline going. It was so exciting. And firing guns when you're a 19-year-old, a bookworm like myself, to fire a gun, Kalashnikov, etc. M16, but also artillery, the heavy cannon. And in fact, one of those artillery shells fired by the enemy nearly landed on our heads. The world seemed to turn upside down for a second. We were thrown off our rocks. It also taught me how life is so precarious. Death could have come at any instant, otherwise I wouldn't be here talking about it. So we learned that, truly the teaching, death is in the hand of Allah. Allah decides who goes when. And I think this is what draws a lot of people still, the camaraderie and the excitement, sense of adventure.
I want us to come back down a bit, to go back a little bit in your story. So you were there with the Shuyukh and all the Ikhwan, and you were talking about this was the Salafist group at that time. So what were some of the inspiring factors besides the situation that you guys were facing in Britain at that particular time? What are some of the things that really incited you, or rather played a big role and pushed you and drove you until you decided to actually explore? Because I'm sure at that time you had a lot going on. You're in school, you could be studying, you could be helping out at home, there was a masjid, I'm sure, you could be taking part in a lot of activities at the masjid. What are some of the things that pushed you or drove you to actually accompany the Sheikh and wanted to go and take part in what was happening in Afghanistan at the time? Yes,
and very importantly, it's actually the teachings of our deen, which about jihad actually, and how it is the highest type of ibadah in one sense, and how the people who do true jihad have the highest rewards, or if you're a true shaheed, martyr, etc. Those teachings especially were actually the most inspirational from the Quran and the Hadith. And so not only did we send dozens of fighters to Afghanistan, but in the 90s, We had a jihad closer to home in Bosnia after the breakup of Yugoslavia, right? 3-year jihad, 1992 to 95, where the Muslims faced ethnic cleansing. So actually hundreds of British fighters went there. Thousands of people went for relief work, but hundreds of fighters from Britain went to fight for the Muslims. A number went to Kashmir and Chechnya as well. So from our group, we lost one friend in Bosnia, killed by the Serb forces. We lost one brother in Kashmir, killed by the Indian forces. And at that time, you see, and we went to Afghanistan fighting an army, we understood that this was legitimate. Jihadis were legitimate theatres of war, and we were carrying out a military-to-military kind of operations. We never thought of attacking civilians. We weren't attacking civilians. We were attacking soldiers, regular army. This was all fair and square in the war, and it's very exciting. Unfortunately, what happened is that one wing of that jihad movement, which really spawned from Afghanistan, one wing became Al-Qaeda, and then later from Al-Qaeda, Daesh or ISIS came out. And the big wake-up call was 9/11. It should have been the embassy bombing there in Nairobi in 1998, but we were too removed from that, unfortunately. For us Westerners, it was 9/11, which was the big wake-up call, because we were forced to confront and do some soul-searching as to these are so-called Mujahideen, previous Mujahideen who were heroes against the Soviet Union, backed by the West actually against the Soviet Union. Osama bin Laden, Abdullah Azzam, all these people. And their group had now decided to attack America and to attack the West. New York City is very similar to London. They're often seen as sister cities. So it was a big shock for the people of London, Britain. I mean, and we did a lot of soul searching. It took me 2 or 3 years to re-evaluate a lot of things I'd believed. I used to believe in the obligation of establishing a Khilafah or Islamic State, for example, and these kind of ideas. I realized we had to distinguish between jihad, legitimate jihad, and terrorism, the killing of innocent people.
And at that time, I mean, by the time that had happened, even before that had happened, these are people that you had met, the likes of Osama bin Laden and the likes. These are people that you had met in the Maraka, at the field.
Well, we never met bin Laden, but because we were in a different part of Afghanistan. But people with very similar views, yes. We were with the Arab training camps. There were a lot of Saudis there. There were Palestinians, Egyptians, Algerians, Moroccans, people from all over the Arab world, Kuwaitis. So many of them hadith scholars, actually, or young sheikhs, if you like. And so this was, we never met those top guys, right? But we were part of that movement, which I believe started off in a positive way, as was backed by the West and the international community against the Soviet Union. But after the Soviets were defeated, they turned their attention actually to attacking the West and attacking innocent civilians. Civilians
who are not in the battlefield. That I want you to hold your thought there. We are at a place where you're doing soul searching. We've seen what are some of the things that drove you, some of the things that pushed you and incited you. We've seen you in the battlefield, fighting, operating the M16 and all that. And then we've seen you after the 9/11, the attack. Now you're in this phase where you're doing soul searching after the 9/11 attack. Please, I want you to hold it there. When you're back, we need to hear more about your soul searching experience, given the Islamic knowledge that you have, and what happened after that, inshallah. Is that okay, Sheikh?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Guys, it's story time, right here in studio. No iPad, no papers, no notes, nothing. We're here to listen to the story and understand what is extremism, what is this war that people are hyping about on social media, straight from the horse's mouth, right here on studio. You will never get to hear this anywhere else, only on Horizon TV, Live Real Talk. Keep it there as we're going on a very short break, and we'll be back.
Horizon TV, the beacon for the nation.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Kwa niaba ya ndugu zetu wa Vanga, siku tarehe 25 Jumamosi inakaokuja hii wa mwezi wa pili, wana halambe ya kuchangia madrasa yao ili wapate wakfu. na hii wamekuja kuifanya Mombasa Islamic Center. Sisi watu wa Mombasa hasa yataka tuhudhurie kwa wingi, na kama hutoweza kuhudhuria basi tuma mchango wako kwa 572858. Tairudia hii namba. Kama hutoweza kuhudhuria, tuma mchango wako kwa 572858. Account utaweka wakfu, au uende Gulf African Bank uulize account ya madrasa tarbia, utaipata. Fikisha ujumbe huu kwa kila Muislamu. Tuweni na ghera kusimama na Waislamu wenzetu wanapokuja kutaka usaidizi kutoka kwetu, na Mwenyezi Mungu atatutilia baraka katika mali yetu na maisha yetu. Wassalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
News is about facts, and here on the Muslim Insight, we go beyond the headlines.
The Qadis, apart from being judicial officials, they are also critical members of our society.
We look at all the angles of the story as we bring stories that matter to you.
I am totally convinced generations to come will have the office of the Chief Qadi.
Join us on the Muslim Insights as we bring you the weekly news recap.
Enzi za wakati wa kusema ati alisema akasisitiza akihutubia wanahabari, enzi hizo hazipo tena.
Every Friday from 8 a.m. only on Horizon TV.
Horizon TV, the beacon for the nation.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thanks so much for keeping it live, Real Talk. And we're here with Imam Dr. Usama Hassan. We have seen how he started his life in Nairobi, Panga, and you, of course, Jamia Masjid being his first masjid that he prayed Tarawih. Allahumma barik. Alhamdulillah, I mean, this place is so iconic. We have seen how he moved into London. We have seen the racism aspect that he went through in London in his early childhood, in his teenage phase and all that. We have seen him visiting Afghanistan and actually being on the forefront of the war. We have seen him now, or rather we are with him when he's doing soul searching after the 9/11 attack at the Twin Tower. And we're still here with Sheikh to explain to us, or rather give us the juice straight from the horse's mouth, as I mentioned earlier. Yes, Sheikhana, welcome back. We are where you're doing soul searching. You were so convinced before that this was a legit cause. This is something that's supposed to be happen. You had the dream, or maybe the hopes, like a lot of other young men, maybe to establish Khilafah at some point in life, right? But again, 9/11 happened, right? And it has taken you back to your corner and made you to go back and do some soul searching. What was the process like?
So let's be honest, you know, a lot of Muslims around the world kind of celebrated 9/11. Not only Muslims, a lot of leftists, especially in South America and around the world actually, who believed America deserved to be hit, for example. And I remember that troubled me because we were so anti-American actually. A lot of the discourse of the groups I mentioned, let's be honest, is very anti-American, very anti-West. And if we complain about Islamophobia, we should think of our own Westophobia sometimes, right? So, you know, I was upset at myself that why am I even having some sympathies for these guys, you know, Al-Qaeda for 9/11, because you can't kill babies, you can't kill innocent
kill the innocent people.
You can't kill innocent people in their thousands. But this was a shock because this was the same people we had basically done jihad with in Afghanistan and in other places as well. So it took me a while to rethink, you know, what's going on. There was some alarm bells even in Afghanistan. We found the Mujahideen groups were actually very divided against each other. They were doing takfir of each other, and they were fighting each other even then. And after 1992, when the communist regime was defeated in Kabul, which we celebrated at the University of Cambridge, I remember with my friends, we expected there to be an Islamic state in Afghanistan, which would merge with the Islamic republics of Iran and Pakistan next door, so it would expand, it would eventually become the global Khilafah. Islamic State or Caliphate. And then we were in for a rude shock, because what happened next was 4 years of vicious civil war in Afghanistan, with the Mujahideen groups fighting each other, what we had seen the seeds of in 1990-91. You know, Kabul was bombed more in the civil war than the Soviets ever did, for example. So that made us realize, well, hold on, you know, some of the criticisms of these groups are legitimate. Are they after power, or after doing it for the sake of Allah? What's going on? Why are they fighting each other? But it was far away in Afghanistan. When it came closer to home, you know, the 9/11, after that, it so happened I had completed my master's and PhD in artificial intelligence, actually. I worked in industry for 6 years in AI. And then I went to Pakistan for a year to teach AI at one of the top universities there, straight after 9/11, well, the year after, 2002 till 3 I was there.
Yeah.
And so then you had the war on terror, or so-called war on terror, going on next door in Afghanistan.
Yeah, yeah.
There was a lot of influence in
It was
Pakistan.
so intense at that time.
So there were a lot of things. For example, we met a man at a dinner party in Islamabad who said he was in touch with Osama bin Laden. This is where the whole world is looking for Osama bin Laden. And people thought he was hiding in the Afghanistan-Pakistan tribal area. But this man in Islamabad was in touch with him, a Pakistani guy. A weird thing like that. Then I came across some guys who were really into these jihad groups, you know, so-called jihad groups, the Kashmir jihad group. And he said something which made me realize he's basically crazy, very naive, or has crazy ideas, I should say. He said, we're going to liberate Kashmir, and we're not going to stop at Kashmir, we're going to liberate the whole of India. And I remember thinking, which world do you live in, bro? I mean, the Kashmir problem has been going on for 70 years, 75 years now, and it's intractable. And you think, just like that, you're gonna, do you know how big India is?
That's
1.5 billion people, you know. What are you talking about? And we'd heard some of these guys saying very extreme things. For example, if you disagree with them, they call you a kafir, you know, immediately. And we'd seen that in London and other places. And all of this slowly added up. We came across people in Pakistan trying to recruit British Muslims to carry out suicide bombings and terrorist attacks in Britain.
In Britain's soil?
Yeah, they were trying to recruit people in Pakistan, you know, people went to visit. One of my friends told me this. He said he went to the headquarters of one of their groups and they tried to recruit him. They said, are you ready for an operation in Britain? And he said, no, what are you talking about? He ran away from that group. And he told me, and at first I didn't believe him, but later events proved him right, actually, because the UK's 9/11 was the 2005 London bombings, 7th of July. And this was led by a British Pakistani Muslim, and you know, they bombed the tubes and trains, they killed 50 plus innocent people. And like after every attack, levels of Islamophobia rise hugely. I had actually completed my soul searching before that. The year before, when the Madrid bombing happened, which is 2003 or 4. And I had preached against the Madrid bombing. It was my turn to give the khutbah at the masjid, Masjid Tawheed in London at the time, where I served for 30 years, but when I left 11 years ago. And it was my turn, and I preached against the Madrid bombings, where 200 innocent people were killed on the trains, right, in Spain. And after the khutbah, 2 men older than me, middle-aged, they came to me crying, and they said, thank you, Osama, you have corrected us, because we were celebrating the Madrid bombings. You see, because it's another anti-Western attack. And I remember thinking, al-mu'minu mir'atul mu'min, yeah? Believers are mirrors of each other. Yeah. And this reminded me of, unfortunately, I had these kind of sympathetic feelings around 9/11. And then we have to counter this Westophobia, or this nonsense of trying to hate your neighbors and anybody who's not Muslim and demonizing them and justifying their killing. So I was already preaching against the terrorism then, and distinguishing between legitimate jihad and...
Because you had experienced it firsthand.
Yes, because we travelled, myself and my friends went to Afghanistan, Bosnia, Kashmir, Chechnya, because one of my friends from London fought for years in Chechnya against Putin's forces then. We travelled thousands of miles, because we just knew instinctively London is a place of peace. It's not Darul Harb, it's Darul Sulh, land of a peace treaty. We're living peacefully there. This is our home, it's our neighbourhood. You want to do jihad, you want to achieve those rewards, you go to a legitimate place of war and you follow the rules. You don't just attack random people, your own neighbours. And so London was a massive wake-up call. And you know, by the way, I'd already received a death threat from the extremist groups when I had started publicly speaking about
going against it
before 7/7.
So you went into soul searching, and now it became apparent some of the red flags, things that probably you saw or you experienced, but again, they never registered at that time. Now they became apparent. One, the fact that a number of these people were just takfiris.
Yes.
They were actually getting people in and out of Islam as they wish. Yes. These people, you questioned their true intention, if it's really to establish the Khilafah or not, or it was just for political reasons or personal gains. Another thing that you would notice is the fact that they were not ready to engage on ilm, on knowledge, or even just to debate on matters to do with knowledge. But again, you go against them and immediately they call you takfiri. Another thing is that they went out of their way and killed civilians.
Yes.
And they moved out of the battle war. They did not follow the rules that are enshrined in the Quran and the Hadith about jihad. Because jihad is a concept that it exists in Islam. But again, it has its rules governing it, right? So these were the red flags that you noticed and actually started distancing yourself and speaking against jihad.
Or the misinterpretation
against
of jihad.
terrorism, sorry,
terrorism,
misinterpretation.
But for true jihad.
Yeah.
And so I came to the conclusion, having served as an imam for decades and been a leader of our movement, the work for the last 10 years, the idea of expressing can be summarized in these 4 principles.
Yeah.
So I wrote for the BBC actually 10 years ago, 2013. But I realized that what's going on, and this is my conclusion really, is that there are 4 major concepts within the Quran and within Islam which are contested between mainstream Islam, or what you might say Islam with a kind of positive outlook which wants to contribute good to the world, versus extremist interpretation of the same terms which bring nothing but death and destruction and negativity actually, and really is a handiwork of shaitan. And those 4 terms are Ummah, Khilafah, Sharia and Jihad, and they're in a logical order. Ummah, Khilafah, Sharia and Jihad. And I'll explain why they're in logical order. It starts with the idea of Ummah, which is a nice idea, the Muslim Ummah, we're all brothers and sisters, it helps you connect to Muslims all around the world, that's good. It's a positive thing. Our Jewish friends have that as well, by the way, some of our Christian friends as well. But it becomes divisive, it becomes us versus them. It's like Muslims, we're a separate nation and we have to hate non-Muslims, we have to hate the kuffar. You hear this kind of language, demonization. And politically what the groups did was, they said the Muslims are a separate nation, and therefore they need their own nation state, if you like, which is the Khilafah, or the Islamic State. That we Muslims worldwide must have a separate country, state of our own. And that's
that we
the
can
Islamic
guide
state.
ourselves using the rule of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Exactly, which is the next point, which is Sharia. If you have a separate state, a Khilafah or Islamic state for all Muslims, the next rule is, well, what's the law of the land? And this is the extremist interpretation of Sharia. For example, forcing men to grow their beard, forcing women to cover up, banning TV as the Taliban did in Afghanistan, forcing people to go to the mosque. That's not true ibadah, it's true ibadah done with a free will. So that is the extremist interpretation of Sharia. And then the 4th principle is jihad, because some of the groups believe jihad comes after Khilafah, like Hizb al-Tahrir, or then the Takfiri groups believe jihad is a means to establishing the Khilafah. But either way, jihad is there, and certainly to their understanding of jihad is to defend and then expand this Islamic state, or so-called caliphate. Whereas we can understand the same 4 terms in much more positive ways, which only brings goodness to people. So, for example, I point out that the word ummah is used 50 times in the Quran. It has at least a dozen different meanings. For example, all descendants of Adam, Nuh and Ibrahim are one ummah. Or all of the prophets of Inna hadi ummatukum ummatan wahida wa ana rabbukum fattaqun. That ayah in Surah Al-Anbiya is after the stories of all of the prophets, from Nuh, Ibrahim, Dawood, Sulaiman, etc., Musa, Isa, Maryam, Zakaria, Yahya. It's saying this is our ummah. It's
all of you, collectively.
All previous prophets. It includes some of the followers who are trying to follow the right path of the prophets. It's not just a tribal thing. It's not like a tribe, Muslims versus the rest. So ummah has to be a positive aspect, and you can have multiple identities. So you and I are part of the Kenyan ummah. I was born in Kenya. I'm also part of the Indian Pakistani ummah, the nation. Ummah just means the nation or group of people. I'm part of the British nation, European nation, but I'm also part of the Muslim ummah. So ummah has many aspects to it. Next one is khilafah. Khilafah ultimately is about good governance and establishing justice on earth. It's not about a particular political model. Because in the Quran, the ultimate khalifa is first Hazrat Adam, Inni ja'ilun fil khalifa, and then Hazrat Dawood. يا داود إنا جعلناك خليفة في الأرض فاحكم بين الناس بالحق ولا تتبع الهوى. So فاحكم بين الناس بالحق, we made you khalifa to establish justice. That's primary purpose.
No.
And you read Ibn Khaldun and others. I read Ibn Khaldun Muqaddimah. I recommend that book. It took me a whole year to read it. The English translation, the abridged one. Muqaddimah Ibn Khaldun, it's phenomenal. Because the man is a polymath, and he talks about science and economics and history and Sharia and everything. And it turned my outlook on life. I realized my understanding of Quran and Sunnah has been very kind of narrow. One of the things he says is that the fuqaha allowed multiple caliphates in Islamic history. You know, the idea that you only have one ruler, that's only if he doesn't cause fitna. But when they're geographically far apart, it's fine to have multiple khalifas. And this was the case in Islamic history. There was Banu Umayyah in Spain at one point, at the same time the Fatimids in Egypt, and the Banu Abbas in Baghdad. They were all claiming to be the Khalifa. And later there was the Safawi, the Mughal, the Ottoman, the Banu Buwayh. There were so many of these states. And not only Ibn Khaldun, but as Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayyah has shown in his book on Islam and the nation state, fuqaha going back 1,000 years, from Isfaraini to Shawkani to Ibn Kathir to Siddiq Hasan Khan Qannuji of India, they all said the same thing, that it's fine to have multiple caliphates or multiple Muslim states, as long as they're not fighting each other and you're preserving the goodness. And this is why we have to understand that the modern nation state is perfectly Islamic, it's compatible with Islam. The United Nations, which bring them together, is also Islamic. International treaties, including the Geneva Convention of War, like you said, are based on the principle of the Quran and the Hadith. Don't kill non-combatants, don't kill farmers, don't kill women and children, don't poison the wells, don't burn the trees. Rasulullah ﷺ gave all these exalted teachings. The next one is Sharia, because ultimately it's a question of whose interpretation of Sharia. So you ask the Taliban now, for them Sharia is to ban girls from school and higher education, right? This is their understanding of Sharia.
And banning TVs in the house.
And banning TVs in the first iteration, and flogging men for shaving their beards and this kind of stuff. So is this the Sharia we want? Fines for women not covering their hair, or beatings. In Iran they have hijab fines, for example. So Sharia, there have been dozens of schools of Sharia, there's many interpretations of fiqh. We have to discuss, what do we mean by tatbiq al-Sharia, implementing the Sharia? What does it mean, on a practical sense? What are Muslims calling for? And I would say, as Ibn al-Qayyim says, we have to remember Sharia is fundamentally about justice, mercy, wisdom and goodness. And so we want to promote goodness in society. That's basically al-amru bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar. Wherever Muslims live, they should be doing something good, contributing to the good. And then finally there's jihad, which, as we've realized, jihad is fundamentally actually a non-violent term, because it started in Mecca, وَجَاهِدُهُمْ بِهِ جِهَادًا كَبِيرًا وَجَاهِدُوا فِي اللَّهِ حَقَّ جِهَادِهِ. In that sense, all of life is a jihad, is a struggle against the self, the ego, shaitan, against injustice, against evil at all levels. And Ibn Taymiyyah said, quoted by Abdullah bin Bayyah again, jihad is the struggle for khair against shar of all types. The most extreme case is military jihad, but that came later. You see, originally the Muslims were told, kufu aydiyakum, restrain your hands, right? Later it became أُذِنَ لِلَّذِينَ يُقَاتِلُونَ بِأَنَّهُمْ ظُلِمُوا. In another riwayah,
actually say qital now is actually the word for engagement, not necessarily jihad, because jihad from Arabic is struggle basically.
Yes, exactly. So
qital is the word. If
in our traditional fiqh, jihad and qital, or military jihad and qital, were used interchangeably.
Okay.
And it's in the Quran as well, وَقَاتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ الَّذِينَ يُقَاتِلُونَكُمْ, etc. But all of that comes with kind of conditions, and has to be understood in context. You see, it was only allowed in self-defense at first, and even amongst the early Muslim scholars, there was a disagreement as to whether you allowed something called jihad al-talab, offensive jihad, or whether jihad was purely defensive. Jihad
and of course there are rules and regulations governing the whole engagement. If there has to be an engagement, that is in the first
exactly,
place.
And it's the last resort. Rasulullah ﷺ used to say, ask Allah for afiyah. Try to avoid, وَإِن جَنَحُوا لِلسَّلْمِ فَجْنَحْ لَهَا وَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ. It's in the Quran. If you can make peace, you make peace. War is the last resort. And it, even strong verses of the Quran like قَاتِلُوهُمْ يُعَذِّبْهُمُ اللَّهُ بِأَيْدِيكُمْ, etc. Fight them, Allah will honor you.
There is a context.
The ayah says, هُمْ بَدَأُوكُمْ أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ. They fought you first. Again, it's in self-defense. Fundamentally, it is about that struggle for goodness against evil. So this is basically some of the work I've been doing over the last 10 years to develop these ideas. There's many other people doing great work in this world on these topics, including the Muslim World League's Makkah Charter, of 2019, Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayyad's work in and others. And so this is the ideological struggle, I think.
Sheikh, we're actually overriding on our time, but again, I just want to understand one thing. I see a lot of people, right, who allow people to interpret for them the Quran and the Hadith. Like, for example, like you, after soul searching, is when you came to realize all these, the aspect of Ummah, the aspect of Khilafah, the aspect of Sharia Jihad, right? And you could clearly now distinguish clearly. But again, still, there are people outside there who allow some people to interpret for them, to still explain to them this concept from the Sharia, what exactly means, from the Quran and the Hadith. What would be your advice to them?
Well, I think we have a crisis actually in the Muslim world. We've had this crisis for many years. But there's been a lot of development actually over the last 20 years, which is fundamentally about educating ourselves better on these concepts, on the arguments that the terrorist groups use, and the ayat and hadith they quote about jihad and those four concepts, and realizing where does it fit in the bigger picture. So for example, as our shuyukh say, in the early days there were no international agreement. It was the Muslims who basically invented international relation theory, and because Allah says, "Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu awfu bil uqud," in the modern now in today's world, Muslim majority nation states have all signed up to the United Nations, to the Geneva Conventions, to the Human Rights Declarations, which were partly written by Muslim scholars actually. The UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and Muslim scholars at the time supported it. They said all of it, of the UDHR, is compatible with Islam. For example, ideas like freedom, liberty, equality, democracy, truth, justice, mercy. These are the values we should be promoting. So
the young men and women who still allow these interpretations to be given to them, what would be your advice to them? Like what exactly are you telling them? If you are talking to them right now inside the room, right, and they would come and tell you, "Yeah, Sheikh, but no, my Sheikh says this and this. My Sheikh says this is about Khilafah. My Sheikh tells me this about Jihad. My Sheikh tells me something else about Sharia or Jihad or anything." What would be your advice to that young man who's watching you right now?
So all of these, we need to study more and basically learn our own history, read our own history, read the tafsir of the Quran. So for example, I'll give you a simple example, this Ibn Khaldun example. When we were younger, we only knew the hadith that you can't have two khalifas. If you have two khalifas, you have to kill the other one, right? It's a hadith from Sahih Muslim, it's taken out of context. But later when I read Ibn Khaldun saying, no, it's fine to have multiple caliphs, because that, in the early time, two khalifas would have been divisive, but as Islam spread all over the world, you could have multiple caliphates. Now this is not well known enough. I think amongst our community, everybody knows about the hadith, if there's two khalifas, kill one of them, right? But they don't know about the long list of scholars Ibn Bayyah mentioned for over the last 1,000 years, including Ibn Kathir and Imam Shawkani and others, who said it's fine to have multiple caliphates. I'll give you another example. Through my research I found that the terrorist groups still are stuck in the fiqh of 12 centuries ago, of Imam Shaybani's time, where it's Darul Islam and Darul Kufr, that's it. And Darul Kufr is either Darul Sulh, land of peace, or Darul Harb. And these groups, you see, they say Kenya is Darul Harb, they say Pakistan is Darul Harb, they say Saudi is Darul Harb, Britain and America, that's how they justify all of these actions. They don't know, and many of them quote Ibn Taymiyyah, they don't know that Ibn Taymiyyah gave a fatwa about a town called Mardin, which was majority Muslim but taken over by Mongol pagan rulers. The people of that time wrote to Ibn Taymiyyah saying, what is the hukum of Mardin, this town in modern day Turkey? Is it Darul Islam or Darul Kufr? Because the people are nearly all Muslim but the rulers are not. And he gave a common sense answer which was remarkable for its time, which was new, which was ijtihad by him. He said it is neither, it's a bit of both. He called it Dar Murakkab, composite or compound land. It's
like a cosmopolitan.
Because you've got the ahkam of Islam, you've still got the masajid, you've got adhan, you've got Salatul Jummah, you have all of that intact. But yes, of course, the Sharia is not being implemented in whatever way fully, because the rulers are now not Muslims. So he said it's a bit of both. And now, lots of these groups who quote Ibn Taymiyyah, they've never heard of Dar Murakkab. They never talk about Dar Murakkab. Dar Murakkab, Sheikh bin Bayyah and others talk about it. I've written about this. It opened the door to multiple complex citizenship, which actually the Ottoman Caliphate adopted. So our brothers say we want to revive the Ottoman Caliphate. You know, next year they'll be talking about the centenary, 100 years since the Ottoman Caliphate was abolished in 1924. Yes. They don't know that 200 years ago, the Ottomans themselves abolished many of the old interpretations of Sharia and adopted what they called Ottomanism or Osmaniya, where they said everybody is an equal Ottoman citizen, Jew, Christian, Muslim, whatever. And that is the basic model, which is also based on the Prophet's Medina Charter. You know, we don't study enough. It's only 2 pages again. Wow. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam made the agreement with 9 Jewish tribes, the Christians, the Mushrikeen of Medina, that we are people of Medina together and we look after our own interests, but if an enemy attacks us, we have to have a common defense. We must...
All of us together.
All of us together.
Yes.
We need to revive these ideas. Our imams, sheikhs and others, you know, have to talk about these things more, and inshallah it's a long and patient time.
Inshallah.
But also to the young people watching, read the testimony of people who've seen the hypocrisy of these groups and killing each other. Daesh versus Al-Qaeda.
Yeah, my key takeaway from this session is the fact that we just need to read by ourselves. We don't have to wait and be spoon-fed and be given information the way we have been doing for the longest time, expecting this and this person, this and this sheikh to come and tell us his own understanding. I think my biggest takeaway was to broaden our perspective and to read more from that, inshallah.
And to ask our leaders to give us grounded tarbiyah. Yeah, it's a mixture of these.
Jazakallah.
Allah give us tawfiq.
Doctor, Ameen ya Rab. Jazakallah khair, Doctor. Jazakallah khair, Imamuna Usama Hassan. Thank you so much. I mean, that was a very eye-opening story and testimony that you got from you tonight. Thank you so much. May Allah keep on blessing you for you to do what you're doing, inshallah.
Jazakumullah khair.
Thanks so much. Guys, I am actually literally overriding on time. It's 9 minutes plus time. Thank you so much. And I mean, as I said, if there's a key takeaway I'm getting from this show tonight, is that we should broaden our perspective. We should read more for ourselves. Read. Don't stick to that script. Don't stick to that one person who's been giving you his own understanding. Broaden your perspective. Read for yourself. Ask questions. Ask the right questions to the right people. My name is Faisal, Kassim, and thank you so much for keeping it live. Real Talk. See you next week, someplace, sometime. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.